An offhand remark eerily predicted the gruesome death of one of America's most notorious assassins. The original autopsy of John Wilkes Booth contains some fascinating things. It's an oft-told tale of Civil War-era justice. Around sunrise on April 26, 1865, Abraham Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, was tracked down to a large Virginia tobacco barn. After refusing to exit, the barn was set ablaze by an overzealous tracker. But before he could escape the inferno, Booth suffered a gunshot wound which would lead to his death. After he died, Booth's body was wrapped in a horse blanket and transferred from a market wagon to a steamer ship to a government tugboat and finally onto an ironclad, the USS Montauk, docked in the Washington Navy Yard. Traveling after the Civil War wasn't a straightforward event, even for an assassin's corpse. Arriving at the Montauk in the early morning of April 27th, Booth's body was placed on a makeshift carpenter's bench next to a rotatable gun turret. The horse blanket that covered the body was removed and replaced with a tarp.
Booth probably had this weapon for at least 5 or 6 years before the assassination took place.
Surgeon General Joseph K. Barnes arrived at the Montauk in the late morning. He had a busy few weeks. According to the Smithsonian, he had directed President Abraham Lincoln's autopsy just 2 weeks prior. Barnes was to be one of the 3 surgeons to perform an autopsy on the man who assassinated the president. According to the account of Lieutenant Commander E.E. Stone, Barnes sidestepped proper military etiquette, boarded the ship without announcement, and the autopsy began unceremoniously. Barnes described in a report to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton that the body was that of a haggard man, shaved free of a distinctive mustache, had a fractured and reset leg, and a large wound in the neck. Doctors concluded the cause of death was a pistol ball that ripped through Booth's neck. Barnes added, "The ball struck low, passing through the bony bridge of 4th and 5th cervical vertebrae, severing the spinal cord." Barnes went on to say that the injury would have paralyzed him instantly. In a remarkably impassioned line for a medical report, the surgeon asserted, "All the horrors of consciousness of suffering and death must have been present to the assassin during the 2 hours he lingered." An explanation of nerve connections from the Cleveland Clinic suggests that with the 2nd and 3rd cervical nerves intact, Booth likely could still feel his face and head as he died. Because the 4th cervical vertebrae contains nerves leading to the diaphragm and is crucial in keeping the lungs functioning, one might conclude that Booth asphyxiated, unable to take a breath. However, the extent of the damage likely delayed this process. The presiding Dr. Joseph Woodward concluded as much, observing that the damage to the phrenic nerve made swallowing impossible, and he came to the conclusion that it took Booth about 2 hours to die. Many last words have been attributed to Booth, though the autopsy doctors were not confident that he was able to speak after his mortal injury. Army Lieutenant Edward P. Doherty's report on Booth's capture confirms that Booth survived 2 hours after being shot, and no last words were recorded.
Lincoln? What does it all mean? What is he talking about?
According to official records from Indiana State University, there were only 3 civilians on the Montauk around the time of the autopsy. One of them was a young hotel clerk named Charles Dawson, and the military officers had the clerk identify the body. Booth was a regular at the National Hotel, staying whenever he toured through D.C. As Booth signed the register, Dawson recalled seeing a small tattoo on the guest's hand. Atlas Obscura says that during the Civil War, tattooing your initials on yourself became a bona fide trend, helping to ensure the identification of their body. The hotel clerk remembered the India ink letters JWB, the same initials of the alias Booth used after the assassination. The rest of the witnesses were conveniently military officers on the ship who happened to know what the actor looked like. Though there were numerous witnesses and acquaintances of Booth in Washington, D.C., and an unconfirmed rumor that a number of co-conspirators were being held in the hull of the Montauk, none of Booth's local stage coworkers or family were contacted. Dr. John Frederick May was working in Washington, D.C. when he was summoned to the Montauk, later recording his observations in a work called Mark of the Scalpel. Dr. May had earlier treated Booth, removing a fibroid tumor from his neck. The wound reopened during the course of one of Booth's performances, and Dr. May further treated it, but it left a unique scar. In his memoirs, Dr. May recalled his hesitancy to identify the body, and it wasn't until Booth was turned over that the evidence May needed was clear, the scar from the earlier surgery. He wrote, "I was finally enabled to imperfectly recognize the features of Booth, but never in a human being had a greater change taken place from the man whom I had seen in the vigor of life and health than in that of the haggard corpse which was before me, with its yellow and discolored skin, its unkempt and matted hair, and its whole facial expression sunken and sharpened by the exposure and starvation it had undergone." The body of Booth was buried and reburied a number of times before it was released back to the Booth family, missing the section of the spinal cord where the bullet had passed. They remain in the collection to this day at what is now called the National Museum of Health and Medicine. The Smithsonian says that Secretary of War Edwin Stanton ordered a single photograph be taken of the corpse by the non-military photographer Alexander Gardner and his assistant. After taking the photo, the assistant was escorted by the government detective James A. Wardell to have the print developed and delivered to the War Department. Wardell handed the print to the chief of the Secret Service and was promptly dismissed. However, no one has confirmed the location or has claimed to have seen the picture, fueling conspiracy theories that Booth had survived.
Sic terramus tempus. No more tyranny, basically.
Ultimately, the identification of John Wilkes Booth was heavily reliant on the scar left behind from Dr. John Frederick May's surgery. Inevitable conspiracy theories aside, mainstream history says that it confirmed the identity of the man who had assassinated the president, as claimed by Dr. May. And that brings us to an eerily prophetic comment. In lighter days, Booth chatted with a surgeon making jokes before his fibroid surgery. Failing to see the humor in one of Booth's dramatic exaggerations, Dr. May still recorded it in his memoirs. Booth cheekily requested that if ever asked about the surgical operation, the doctor should explain it away by saying that the operation had been done to remove a bullet from his neck.